Hey everyone, and welcome back to Time with Tim. I'm Andy Carlson, joined by Tim Fletcher, and today we're sitting down with someone whose work has reshaped how so many of us understand trauma, healing, and what it means to feel safe in our own bodies. Deb Dana is a clinician, consultant, author, and one of the world's leading translators of polyvagal theory. Through her books and teachings, she's helped countless people understand that our biology, not our thinking, is what first shapes our feelings of safety, connection, protection, and overwhelm. Her gift is turning complex science into everyday language that feels accessible, embodied, and deeply compassionate. Deb, we're so grateful to have you here today.
Oh, it's so nice to be with both of you.
So, Deb, before we dive into the nervous system, we always like to give our guests a chance to help listeners feel who they are behind their work. And so, if you're comfortable, would you share just a little bit about the early experiences or influences that shaped your passion for understanding the nervous system?
Yeah, sure. It's at this point in my life, I'm 72, and something happens when you reach that decade. I think you begin looking back a bit, and as I look back, I still can be really surprised at where I am right now. Right? There was. You look back and you think, oh, that was the moment when my life changed. But in that moment, you don't know it, right? So I'd always been a neuroscience nerd, and I'm a clinical social worker by training. And I always thought my clients should understand their brains because the brain was what I thought we were working with, right? And then I read Steve Porges's first book. And my whole world changed because it was like a missing piece of the puzzle just fell into place. And I thought, oh, it's not really our brains, it's our body. It's our nervous system. That is really what we need to be working with because it's sending the information to the brain, right? And so I need to go before the brain to the body. And that set me off on a path of discovery. I'm the kind of person who loves to read research, loves to read science, and then wants to say, okay, how do I bring this to my clients? Right. So that was the next step. And back in those days, I'm trying to think, it was probably 2011, 2012, something like that. And back in those days, you called people up on the phone. Right. So I called Steve on the phone and introduced myself. And we had some people in common who had been to Maine. I live in Maine part-time. Maine is my soul home. And I had a group practice, and some of his colleagues had come to my group practice to present for us. And I said, would you like to come to Maine and do a workshop for my colleagues? Because we're all fascinated with what you're doing. And he said, sure. Right? Said, there it was. So back in those days, you called somebody on the phone, you invite them, and they said yes, and that was it. And so that was the beginning of this very interesting journey that I've now been on. Because for those of you who don't know Steve or haven't seen him present, he's brilliant. He's a brilliant scientist and a humble human being and one of the kindest people I know. And he's sometimes his work is hard to understand because he's so technical, he's so scientific. That's his gift. And so it was fun for me because I was playing around with how do I bring this to my clients, and he was so encouraging from the very beginning. He said, "Oh, that's kind of fun. Let's try that." So, yeah, if you could have seen me in those early days, I'm in a room over the garage in my house in Maine, playing with wooden ladders, right? Because the ladder was what I ended up doing. So wooden ladders and little wooden mannequins that I was moving around on the ladders. And it was like, oh, when I look back on it now, I think that was really fun, right? So that's sort of where it all began. And here we are now.
Fascinating. Can I just push you back a little bit farther in your thinking? So were there any early childhood events that kind of shaped you and created this desire to get into neuroscience and therapy, all of that?
It's interesting because my father was a very he loved learning, so I probably got a love from learning from him. I grew up in a house that was I think I would have described it as quiet before I understood the nervous system. I think now I would describe it as Shutdown. It was a house that was had a lot going on, but it was all buried, right? And so learning and excelling at learning was something that was an acceptable way to, use your energy, I suppose, would be a way of thinking about it. And so I always loved learning, loved doing that. And then, I set off on an interesting path. I was a young mom. So when I was pregnant in high school and got married very young and started my own little world. And that's probably another place where I, was sort of experimenting with how do I do this differently? I think most of us do that. How do we do it differently, right? But how do I make a home that has energy in it that feels, now I would say safe. Back then I'd probably say happy, right? It's interesting when you reframe everything now is safe or unsafe, right? I can think of it that way, but trying to create a different world for myself, right? And I've always been pretty independent, I think, as well. So, how do I create a world that works for myself and my child, and then, later on for my children. I have 3 amazing kids and grandkids, and it's been an interesting ride to be where I am now. And I got a bachelor's in social work way back when BSW was just the thing that people could get. And then I did a lot of other things for the next 20 years while I was raising my kids. I worked in the schools. I worked for the athletic department. And when my last child went off to college and I was alone, I've been divorced for quite a while, and so I was alone, and I thought, what do I want to do? And I remember sitting with my therapist and thinking with her, I don't know what I want to do. Maybe I should foster some kids. Maybe I just don't know what I want to do, but I need to do something. I want to serve in some way, right? And she said, well, we'll think about it. And I came back the next week and I said, took care of it, solved that problem. I applied for the MSW program at my university. And she kind of just looked at me. I said, no, it's going to be good. So, how you just fall into things and you think, this is it, right? So, and that's what led me then to here. And, I'm sure you've had the same, both of you. You run into people who are just, they're put on your path because they're meant to be, right? And I had she was a supervisor when I was doing my placement. And in the States, when you graduate, you have to do 2 years of supervised practice to get your independent clinical license. And I had been working with her. We were doing sexual abuse treatment, and she was just an amazing human and did things. She was a rule bender, which I love. I also love rule benders. Not a rule breaker, but a rule bender. And she just saw, we'll do this. And she looked at me and she said, you will never survive in a typical agency. You just will not survive for 2 years. So I'm going to start an agency. And it was like she did. She started an agency, and then I could work for her for 2 years and get my clinical license. And we went on to have that agency going and doing things in a very different way, which was really what I so appreciated about her until she got sick and died. But she was the one who taught me that it's about connection, right? That the world tells you need to do things in a certain way, right? And that there are a lot of ethical principles that we obviously follow, but there are others that the rules that are there not to help people connect, but to get in the way of healing. And I carry that with me, which again, I think when we think about the nervous system and Steve's work, it's all about feeling safe, which is not a cognitive experience, right? It's an embodied one. So yeah, I think now in my world, I look at everything through the lens of the nervous system, and what does my nervous system or your nervous system need to feel just a little bit safer in the world.
Beautiful. I just want to explore something because your story ties in a little bit with my story. So I'm 65, and I spend a lot of time in reflective thinking about my upbringing, because similar to you, I was in a very kind of British home that was very staid and calm and quiet and polite, and on the outside it was a wonderful family. It was safe physically, it was safe emotionally in a lot of ways, but I get a lot of clients today who go, I had a wonderful childhood. How could I have complex trauma? And again, to me, they're looking at seeing trauma as basically big T, something horrific, or you only get big T trauma if you use perception, the five senses. And what I began to realize is this was my family, there was a lot of repression of emotions, of just being kind of vivacious, yourself, authentic. You had to conform to certain kind of things. And so my neuroception was picking up that this isn't totally safe. And so I began to realize, wow, I have this very subtle, complex trauma that everybody looking from the outside go, how could you have trauma? You got to, this, and I think I'm hearing that in you as well. And it's the beauty to me of looking back and seeing some of these subtleties. And it wasn't like I had a terrible childhood. I had many things, a wonderful childhood, but it's those subtle things and how it affected me. And like you, it drove me to escape into my head. And I loved learning, which became a great positive, but it also was a way of avoiding emotions in my body. And I've had to learn how to sort that out. So to me, like, your story meshes with mine in that very subtle form of complex trauma that we get. But it's also leading us into talking about polyvagal theory, which is really where we want to go with you. But if you could just comment on, I think to me, a starting point for many people in understanding the vagus nerve and polyvagal theory is kind of that perception, interoception, neuroception. Could you just kind of give a quick overview to help people understand what we're talking about?
Sure. So at its most simple way of understanding, polyvagal theory has three organizing principles: neuroception, hierarchy, co-regulation. So neuroception was the word that Steve created because there's not a word in the English language that sort of illustrates how the body listens, right? Perception's how the brain listens, but your nervous system is connected to your brain, but it's a subcortical embodied part of your biology, and so it listens differently. So neuroception uses three pathways, and those are the pathways you and I are reflecting on as we think back to our childhood. There's an inside pathway. It listens inside your body to take the temperature of, does this feel okay or not, right? It listens outside in the environment. Again, what's happening out there, and does it feel safe or unsafe? And then it listens in the between, which is the one I love. It listens from nervous system to nervous system, not brain to brain, but body to body, nervous system to nervous system. It gets a sense of, does this person feel safe enough to connect with or not, right? And those three pathways are always working in the background, right? And when we don't realize that until we turn toward them and sort of bring them into our explicit awareness. But if you've ever had a gut feeling about something, right, that's your neuroception at work, right? A gut feeling, oh, don't go there, or, oh, somebody have a gut feeling about a person, oh, I think I'd like to get to know this person more. That's your nervous system's neuroception at work. So I like to call it your autonomic intuition, because that, I think, really says what it is. So neuroception then moves you somewhere on the hierarchy, which is those three basic states that we've come to know. We have safe and connected. So when your neuroception is one of oh, this feels good, this feels okay, this feels safe, you move into the ventral vagal state. which is this beautiful part of your vagus nerve that helps you communicate and connect and be creative and curious and all these amazing things that we can be in the world when we feel safe, and only when we feel safe. And again, it's a biological safety, right? It's not I can't think my way to that place. My nervous system has to help me come to that place. So that's the state we're looking for, is that state of ventral regulation and safety. But when the neuroception's one of feeling unsafe, the nervous system has two choices. The first being fight and flight, which I think most of us recognize. You know what that feels like, right? It's either that anger, that frustration, that rage, that fight, or it's that anxiety, right? That panic, that worry that get me out of here, flight, right? So that's one choice of the nervous system. The other choice is the collapse, shutdown, disconnect, disappear, right? And that's the nervous system. That's the other part of the vagus, right? We have the part of the vagus that helps us connect. We have the part of the vagus that helps us disappear, right? In service of our safety and survival. Right. And it's interesting to think about, because now you have me reflecting on my childhood, right? So now I'm looking back and I'm thinking, and I do know this because I talk about this a lot when I teach, but that disappear, disconnect, become invisible was my nervous system's preferred survival state. It's what I call your home away from home, right? So what was yours?
Mine was it was partly that, but it grew into a fawning.
And appeasement.
Appeasement, yeah. But very much, let's be as invisible as possible, make no demands, suppress your needs, be compliant, and then everything will be good. To me, what we get a lot with people that come into our program would be they judge themselves harshly, that they went into fight, flight, freeze, fawn, that they tried to be invisible, that they people pleased, all of those different things. And it's like, whoa, your nervous system is built for safety and to help you survive.
Yes.
So don't beat up that child or that nervous system. And so I just kind of love that you're taking the judgment out of it.
I like to tell people that it's not a cognitive choice. It's not that you want to fight or flight or disappear. It's a biological choice. So it's not that you're unwilling, you're biologically unable, right? And I think that helps us begin to have a bit of self-compassion's tough. For me, curiosity comes first. So you can have a bit of curiosity about that. Oh, okay, that's interesting. So I didn't decide to be this way. My nervous system decided on my behalf. And now I can be curious about, I wonder why, right? So curiosity, and then you can have some compassion. Somewhere down the road is self-compassion. It's really hard to get to, though, isn't it? Yeah. And again, curiosity, compassion, self-compassion, unless you have enough of that ventral, state active and alive in your system, you are unable to be curious, unable to be self-compassionate or have compassion. Not that you don't want to. Your brain may so want you to do that. Biologically cannot. Your system has closed the door to those capacities because it simply wants to help you survive. And you didn't get to choose. I love it when people reflect on, things happen and people reflect on, well, if that was me, I would have, right? I think, really, you don't have any idea what you would have done. Your brain wants you to think you would have done this thing, but your nervous system in the moment would make a choice for you. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I always, to me, you're designed to be in that ventral state, safety and connection, and that's where you flourish. That's where you develop and learn and are curious, etc. And all those joy and all those good brain chemicals are happening. But for a child that neuroception is picking up danger, you can't be in that state, especially if you don't have a co-regulator that's coming to help you. You feel very alone. And so your nervous system is going to go into one of those, your dorsal vagal, your sympathetic. It has to survive. Yeah. But the very thing you need to find life it can't get to. So you end up kind of having to be alive physically, but not alive in your soul, as a necessary survival. And it's, but then to me, the sad thing is that if complex trauma is, it's ongoing. You have to be there all the time. So it becomes your default setting. It's now your autopilot that you're going to be in the two survival states of your nervous system and not in the central state. And to go back to that healthy state feels weird. It feels wrong. It creates anxiety. It creates all kinds of funny feelings inside of you. And so it's not just like there's a magic switch you can flip and then all of a sudden you're there. So I want to switch to Andy because I think he's got a whole bunch of questions he wants to systematically go at here.
Oh boy, okay.
And so I got to let Andy jump in here.
I'm so excited for this, and I'm lost just listening, not lost, but like lost in listening to the two of you talk right now. And so what I'd like to start off is just with something like personal. So I've been listening to your book Anchored while I drive the car, and I find that it shifts me into ventral as I'm driving. Like I can feel that shift because I'm going from the sympathetic alertness. It's icy roads here right now, worried about that. And then all of a sudden, like the pacing of your voice, the warmth, the way you explain the system, like it's soothing and I feel safer. And so I'm just really curious whether you intentionally narrate with the ventral quality or if that's just how you present yourself, how it flows out of you.
It's interesting. I want to tell you a quick little anecdote about reading Anchored because they said they wanted to turn it into an audiobook and they would send me samples of people reading it. And I emailed back and I said, could I read it myself? Which they don't really like people to do. And they told me that the audio company said I had to send a audition tape. And I thought, I did it, but I thought, what am I going to do if they say no? That would be a horrible feeling, right? So anyway, but I think I've been told that my tone of voice, my prosody, is a cue of safety for many, many nervous systems. So it is the way that I speak, that I read. I am anchored in ventral. Right. And so that is the tone of voice that you get there. Tone of voice is one of the ways the nervous system can send a cue of welcome. And it's a way that a nervous system listens to hear, does this person feel safe or not? And again, it's all below the level of conscious awareness. So you might think, have you met somebody whose tone of voice just grates on you? Right? It's the wrong pitch, the wrong frequency. It's too fast. It's too slow, something, right? And your nervous system picks that up and you are going to make up a story about that person because that's the brain's job, is to take this neuroceptive information and make up a story. So, for you, the story, your brain makes up the feeling that your nervous system has when you're listening to me read Anchored is one of welcome, right? That's probably not true for everybody. We all have our own ways that we receive sound, and the nervous system responds very intensely to sound.
I want to follow up on that, but I'm going to offer you a compliment complaint about Anchored. And the compliment complaint is that when I find a book that's so good, I love to offer it to clients because coming from the original author will be better than coming from me, and then I can help them with it. And so usually I'm very clear on, I want you to read this book, or I'm very clear on, you need to listen to this book. That'll be beneficial. And so my complaint is that yours is a book, Anchored, I believe, is a book that's meant to be read. It's meant to be read in a physical form, and yet it's also so valuable in the audio form due to that. the welcoming, the
Yeah.
safety that it helps
Yeah.
to bring it in.
Yeah.
And so that's my compliment
I like
complaint.
that compliment complaint. I've never heard that. So I like that. It's interesting because with the nervous system, having choice is so important, right? And so it would be interesting with your clients to give them a sample of the listen and a sample of the reading and see where their nervous system draws them, right? Because some will be drawn in one way and some in another. But again, that's one of the principles of working with the nervous system: context, choice, and connection. So having some amount of choice is important. Having some context around what are we doing and why are we doing it is important. And I think sometimes we don't offer enough of that, right? And then connection, which is that beautiful sense of I'm not traveling alone in this experience, right? That's what the nervous system wants. It wants to know it's being accompanied, and it feels safe in that accompaniment. Yeah.
And I want to go back to something that you said as you were talking about that. So, you've met and you've worked with so many people across the full spectrum of states. And so whether there's collapse, mobilization, shutdown, playfulness, connection, and you talked about that ability to sense, that the grading of the voice or something. Are you able to sense someone's nervous system state, like simply through their cues of voice, their facial expression, their words? Like how does that look and feel like for you?
I mean, I get a lot of clues, right? By being with, and even, I will reassure people, even, this way, we get a lot of cues, right? So when we all moved to working online, everybody was terrified that we were going to lose all the humanness of it. And we didn't, right? Because we can feel that sense of connection or disconnect, across the video screen. I think the thing that I've learned, and I learned this the hard way, as most of us do, is to never assume that I'm knowing what your nervous system is doing or trying to tell me, and to simply ask, say, "Oh, my nervous system is feeling this. What's happening for you?" Right? And so we always want to be curious, right? Like Tim's nodding his head. Head nods are a cue of safety. Right? Smiles are a cue of safety. The eyes, cue of safety. The way we move, a tilted head. These are all cues of safety. And so I can begin to feel, my system begins to feel connected to both of you. And yet, if you're my clients and I'm working with you, I'm going to name, here's what I'm noticing in my system. Where's your system taking you? Because we never want to make that assumption. We want to, two reasons. We want to check out, is what I'm feeling, what you're sending, and also to help you connect inside your own system so that you spend a moment thinking, well, let me think. Let me see what's happening in there.
I like that. And I think too, I actually have a side question. So like what you're describing here, when we think about just the boundaries and emotional boundaries. So when somebody's feeling something, does that ever, well, I'll ask it as a personal, does that ever take you into a place of dysregulation based off of how somebody else is showing up? And then
Yeah.
how do you come
Yeah.
back from that?
Yeah, it's interesting because in my professional work, less so, because I know my responsibility is to be anchored in ventral and to offer that ventral regulation to the people I'm working with, because often the experience they have when they dysregulate is everybody around them dysregulates as well. And so I want to offer a different experience to their nervous system, right? And then their nervous system begins to feel, oh, not everybody behaves in this. Not every time I get, a lot of us think we're too much, too, fill in the next word, too needy, too big, too loud, and when you're met with a nervous system that just holds you in that, and it's perfectly fine, you begin to think about yourself differently. So in my professional work, I'm pretty good at staying regulated. In my personal life, I can get messy with the best of them, right? Because you're just showing up as a human, right? And, depending on who it is, of course, with my kids or my grandkids, I have a different role, but it's just with my friends or, it's like I can be as messy as anybody. And I think that's true for all of us. I will also say, in your role as a partner or a parent, or a colleague or a friend, when we have those messy moments, that's okay. It's normal. It's expected. Those little ruptures happen in relationships all the time, and they actually make a relationship stronger because we have a rupture. We notice it. We name it. Unlike the household that I grew up with where nothing was ever noticed and named, right? If we notice it and name it and come back and offer a repair, the relationship gets stronger.
Maybe for people who have never had that household where they saw a rupture be repaired, or they were taught to be silenced in some way, how do you guide people to start to learn to repair after a rupture?
Yeah, so the first step is to notice that a rupture happened and name it for yourself, right? So that you can acknowledge either someone had a rupture with me or I caused the rupture, either way, right? Just notice and name it. And then we can begin to say, so what's the next step, right? What would my nervous system need to feel like I was coming back into connection? Because a repair is about being able to come back into safe connection, right? And sometimes it's words, right? Saying, I am so sorry. Could we try this again? Sometimes it's words. Sometimes some people have had a lot of words with no follow through. And so their nervous system just ignores words totally. It's not words, it's actions, right? And so again, this is what I love about the nervous system. You can be curious, right? So if you and I had a rupture, we think, well, let's play around with what would it feel like to safely find our way back into connection. I don't know what that would be. Right? And you can't do that step until you've come back into enough regulation to have that ability to process in that way. Because, we didn't say this before, but when you're dysregulated, when you move into a survival strategy, your prefrontal cortex, your brain goes into hypoactive mode. So you no longer have the rational problem-solving, planning capacity that you need. And it's only when you come back to enough regulation, you don't have to be fully regulated because we don't need that. We just need enough regulation to feel like, oh, I'm beginning to be able to see differently. Your brain is working with your nervous system. And then you can begin to explore, what happened? What do we need to be able to find our way back into connection? Right. And I think the sad thing is for many of us and for many people, when the person on the other end can't find their way back to enough regulation so that they're available to reconnect. Right. And in my work and in my personal experience, and probably, your personal experience in your work as well, there are many times when relationships, are downsized because they can't become safe again. Right. And it's not because the person doesn't want to or is unwilling, but they're under so much threat. Their nervous system is not allowing them to come back to a place where they could find a way to reconnect. And I tell people all the time, and maybe all of us have someone in our life that we have downsized a relationship with and have a wish that someday it would come back. So you can hold the wish, but you can't keep, fighting that fight because you're fighting against a nervous system that just feels too under threat to be able to come back to connection. So, repair is something I think we don't learn growing up. Most of us don't have it modeled, don't learn it. And it is an essential skill for human relationships.
I first encountered you many years ago with the ladder that you designed, and it's just kind of ventral, and then where do you go when the stress increases, and then you go up the ladder as danger increases. And so to me, what I enjoyed in your book, Anchored in very early, is you said that at each rung of the ladder, you're asking different questions. about the world, about your
Yep.
that. Could you just expand on that? Because I think, to me, like we just talked about, you got rupture in a relationship, and you go to a different part of your brain, which is basically guided by emotions, what you're feeling, not by facts. And the other person, if they're in danger, they can't get to a regulated place because your whole perception of the world, your perception of yourself has switched somehow to, actually, it's kind of a bunch of different lies that you've picked up along the way, but it feels very real. It feels very true.
Yeah.
So would you mind just kind of walking us through that?
Sure. Yeah, because each of our states that we talked about has a different set of stories, right? And so when I am in a let's go to a sympathetic fight and flight, I feel under threat. I feel in danger, right? I feel unsafe in some way in the world. And my neuroception is one of danger. And I go to fight and flight. And then from that energy, my brain fills in the story. And I like to think of, we have, 3 sentences we fill in each state. I am. So I am, fill in that sentence. When you feel that rise of fight, that anger, that rage, or that rise of anxiety, panic, flight, I am, and everybody who's listening can fill that in for themselves. I am what? Right? How would you fill that in, Tim? I am what?
Well, when I'm in the fight state, it's always I am right. I am
yes.
wrong. I am wronged. I am entitled.
Yep.
I find somebody to blame.
Yep.
So it's very self-righteous.
Yep.
I am.
Yep.
When I'm in flight, it's I am not enough. I can't handle this.
Yeah.
So it goes from this almost overcompensating, I'm better than everybody, to this inferior underestimation of myself.
Yeah. So that's very, very common for fight and flight. So that's the I am. And you can think, when you are in that belief system, your stories all flow from that, right? And then the second sentence is people are, right? Because we do the same thing with people. People are dangerous, or people are in my way. That's when I love people are in my way, right? Or, people are so
insensitive.
unhelpful.
Nobody cares about me. Nobody understands me. Nobody sees me.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, everything about your world is colored by those beliefs. I am, people are, and the last one is the world is. The world is what? When you're in that survival strategy, the world is,
unfair, unjust, evil, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a scary place, right? The world's a scary place. So think, if you are in this state, you can't be convinced of something else, right? You cannot convince someone that they're okay and they're perfectly safe. You can't talk to their brain because their nervous system is taken over and is bringing these stories alive. So that's the sympathetic storyland, right? The dorsal world is a very, very different world. So if we think for a minute, let's dip into dorsal. Dorsal's that place of, no energy, no interest, going through the motions, disappearing, fly under the radar, don't see me, don't be seen, right? So in this place, what's your story about yourself? I am what?
Well, to me, it's I am a victim that doesn't matter. That's basically a zero.
My clients would tell me that they felt abandoned, lost.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Totally alone.
Yep. Yeah. You can feel it as we talk about it. You can feel the energy just going away. And how about people are? People are what? When you're here, people are?
To me, it's people are totally indifferent, don't care, in their own worlds. You want to make everybody a narcissist at that moment.
Yeah. And sometimes it's hard to even remember there are people in the world.
Yeah.
We're so, on our own, lost. Yeah. And then the world is what?
Well, to me, at that time, the world is, it is so totally unsafe that I have to escape into an internal world.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the world doesn't even exist. I forget there's anything out there. Yeah. Yeah. And so feel the difference between the sympathetic story and the dorsal story. Right. And again, these are very typical stories for sympathetic and dorsal because that's the energy, that's the protective space your system has taken you to. And if somebody is in that dorsal place of hopeless, despair, give up, right, and you try to get them to see the bright side, right? Count your blessings, see the bright side. It's impossible. Not because they want to feel this way, but biologically, this is where they are. Right. Yeah. So those are the survival stories. But let's go to ventral. Let's hear the story of safety and connection. Right. So if we can come to that place of feeling, even if we just dip a toe in it, because for nowadays the world is pretty crazy. Right. It's a hard world to navigate at the moment. And so people will tell me, I can't find ventral. I said, well, you don't have to, swim in the ventral sea, but could you dip a toe in? Right, that's all we need. So if we can find a little bit of that ventral regulating energy, and the three of us here looking at each other, that helps me feel that sense of safety and connection. So from there, I am what?
Sometimes helps me is I can visualize those times as a child when I felt very safe and loved and my needs were taken care of.
Yeah.
And in those moments, I can quickly put into words, I matter. I have value.
Yes.
I'm worth standing up for.
Yes.
My needs are important.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So it's just that total shift from a very negative focus of myself to a very balanced, positive focus.
Yeah. It's interesting. You said you remember moments, right? As you're remembering, your nervous system remembers those moments. Your nervous system wired them in. We think all the time about how our nervous system wires in the traumatic memory, the traumatic moments, but it also wires in those moments of okayness. And so you brought one up and you can think, oh, yes, the story now is I matter, right? I'm worth, being here, right?
Yeah, and I think with it is I don't have to earn my value. I don't have to earn love. I am lovable. I am valuable. Just inherently the way I am. And that takes this load of pressure of trying to prove yourself.
Yes. Yeah. You can feel the shift.
Yeah.
You can feel it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And people are what? In this place, people are what?
People are safe to connect to, and I want to connect because the people in my life are worth connecting to. I benefit from it. I need them in my life as role models, as meeting relational needs. So again, people now are safe and have value as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you begin to see them differently. Yeah, yeah. And then the world is what?
World's a place of opportunity, awe, exploration, connection. All the things that I long for and need can now be found.
Yeah. So, the three very different sets of stories, right? Again, that we don't get to choose, right? Our nervous system takes us into a state and then takes us into the stories that live in that state for us, right? And it's very fascinating because you can look at a moment in time and this same moment in time, depending on what state you're in, has a very different story that goes along with it. So it just, I love this practice because it reminds us that our state creates the stories that we then enter into and believe to be true.
And I think to me, what's so important for the clients that we work with is you can be in your ventral state and in a wonderful, intimate relationship, but then your partner does something that triggers an old wound, and all of a sudden you're in your sympathetic state, and the stories in your head change automatically, and you can't be reasoned with in that moment. You can't repair at that moment because you are incapable of seeing any other story. And I think that's what Andy was getting to is how do you get back to that regulated ventral state once you're triggered?
I mean, and part it's so interesting because it's some familiar cue of danger from our past that has come alive in the present moment and has taken us over, right? And so one of the things that we can work with is to recognize, wow, I'm feeling a lot of whatever, with anger, anxiety, or just shutdown happening. When you can notice and name that, and in order to notice and name, you have to have a bit of your brain on board. So you have a bit of ventral along for the ride with you. And as long as that is true, you can slow it down. Right. And that's really what we want to do to me. Just slow it down so that I can not automatically go into that old pattern that is there, again, in service of my safety and survival, but in this moment, not serving me well. Served me well when it was needed in the past. Maybe it isn't needed now. And so when we can slow it down for just a moment, we can ask that question. We can say, is this response, is my intense response needed in this moment? Right.
And to me, this is such an important piece. So when I first started teaching polyvagal theory to people, what I saw happening was people kind of thought they would be 100% into one state or 100% in another state or 100% in dorsal shutdown state. And it was like, no, you can still have a wee bit of ventral happening even though you're experiencing other states. Can you just expand on that? Because I think it's such an important piece for people to understand.
Yeah, because those three states are always, active and alive in our system. Where we go depends on which one has taken up the most space in our system. So when I'm anchored in ventral, it's sympathetic and dorsal are still there in the background. Right. And I just need a critical mass of ventral in order to stay in this place of regulation. So we can think about the layers of states. That's one way to think about it. What layer is in the foreground right now? Which layer is most present for you? And then you can look what one is next, look underneath that one, what one's next, and then what's the third one. And those layers move like this all the time. Right? Like I'm very anchored in ventral right now, and I can feel a lot of sympathetic underneath, which is some, excited energy, and then dorsal, way in the background. And, you might ask me a question 2 minutes from now that totally freaks out my nervous system, and sympathetic might just jump right up to the foreground. Right. And then ventral might go back, but that's always, those changes are always happening. And when you said, people often, would come and say, how do I get to ventral? I said, well, we can figure out the pathways that help you come back to ventral, but you got to recognize nobody's there all the time. Nobody is there all the time, nor do we want to be, right? The movement down and up through our states is what brings, life and joy and flavors and necessary for us. So the fact that you dysregulate, the fact that you go to a survival strategy is not a bad thing. And we don't actually suffer when that happens. We suffer if we get stuck in that survival strategy, right? So if, think about your day so far today, and you can think, oh, I've had moments of moving out of regulation. I've had moments of feeling some of that anxiety or the anger, or I've had moments when I thought, oh, I'm just not really here, right? Those are all normal things that happen during the course of a day. So we want to help people understand that we want to feel the flavors of your states. I guess that's the other thing I like is flavors. Like ventral, I think has gotten a bad name recently because people say, oh, if you come to ventral, you get calm. Well, it's one of the flavors, right? But you can also be excited or passionate or strong or stand up for what you believe in or playful or zen or relaxed. There are all of these flavors. The way you know you're in ventral is if your neuroception is one of safety. Right? So if you came to me and said, Deb, I've had a sad week. Right? Sad is a label you're putting on something, but I don't know what that is. And so I would say to you, oh, Tim, tell me more about that. What state was that sadness coming from? Because it could have been ventral, could have been sympathetic, could have been dorsal. I don't know. Right? So it's interesting to sort of think, oh, let's explore more.
And I'm going to get back to you, and I have a habit of doing this on Andy. I give him the reins, and then I take him back. But I just love that you're nuancing all of this, Deb, because I think to me what happens when, like, Steve's brought this great theory, polyvagal theory, then people tend to go black and white on it and oversimplify it, and then it ends up doing damage to people. And we have to keep having dialogues that nuance out and normalize that life isn't just this pure state over here or pure dorsal state. It's blending. It's constantly back and forth and nuanced. And I'm so grateful that you're able to do that for people. But anyways, Andy, back to you.
Yeah, I think, well, speaking about the nuance is great. And Deb just touched, like you're mentioning flow. For the longest time, I had a very simplistic view, and I think many people do, and I'd love you to speak to this a little bit, is sympathetic bad, parasympathetic good.
Yeah.
And so the sympathetics, fight, flight, anxiety, hate that. I don't want to be around that. Could you maybe talk a little bit about maybe what healthy sympathetic
Yeah.
is?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and it's interesting. We try and figure out how to name what that is: a regulated sympathetic, I don't know, healthy, whatever, however we name it. But what we know is if your system is under the influence of ventral, so if ventral is taking up more space in my system so that it's running the show, right? Sympathetic is doing its everyday role in the background, which is to bring me the energy I need to move through my day, right? I have to have sympathetic energy or I wouldn't be able to do this, right? And as we're talking, as I get more excited and my hands go and all this, that's more sympathetic energy coming under the influence of ventral. It's exactly what it's needed. It's helping with my breath rhythms, with my heart rhythms, with all of that. So it's a state that when it's partnered with ventral helps us move, and we need to move, right? And dorsal, the same thing's true with dorsal. If dorsal is under the influence of ventral, then dorsal is running your digestion in a healthy way. That's its job. That's its everyday role, is to make sure that you get the nutrients you need to nourish you, right? And so if you think about, have you had moments when you have digestive issues? Most of our clients and most people who are suffering with some sort of difficulty, have just digestive issues. That's because their dorsal system is no longer under the influence of ventral, and it's doing a survival response. And when it moves into a survival response, your digestion is out of order. That's the first thing that happens. And then all these other, because again, it's interesting that the nervous system runs both your physical being and your psychological being. So it does both. Right. So yeah, we need sympathetic and dorsal to be working with ventral in order to have a balanced, a thriving system. Right. We can survive without that. Right. Because sympathetic and dorsal can help us survive. We can make it through the moment. And many, many people in the world live in sympathetic or dorsal or some loop that takes them through both of these. But we can't thrive as humans. We can't connect with humans, create community, do all those beautiful things that we're trying to do unless we have unless we're able to find our way to ventral, not be there all the time, but know that I have pathways that bring me back to ventral. And the thing that I love about the nervous system and about understanding the biology is that every human has those pathways, because every single nervous system has a ventral state wired in. You don't have to go create it anywhere. It's already inside. We just have to find the pathway that maybe you haven't walked that pathway very often. Maybe you've had to be in survival. And we can find that pathway and begin to walk it. And the more you find your way back to ventral, the easier your nervous system finds to take you there and help you really be nourished in that place.
So we have a lot of people who come in where they've been in this chronically overwhelmed state, like in the sympathetic or the dorsal. And so how do you begin to help them walk that pathway back to ventral?
And that's probably why in the beginning, long ago, when I was creating maps with clients, we did a triggers and glimmers map. That's where glimmers came from, because it's easy for us to identify the things that dysregulate us, right? And we feel them and we go into those places and we think that's all there is in my life. And yet we also know that there are tiny moments of okayness in every life, in every day. And we miss those moments, right? And so, we talked earlier about count your blessings or always look on the bright side. That's not what this is. I want to say that. But it's a recognition that your nervous system can find those tiny moments and can hold both the trauma, the suffering, and the okayness. Right. And so that's where I start with people. I teach them about glimmers, those tiny moments when the nervous system feels something a bit okay. Right. And I used to call them moments of safety, connection. I said, no, that's too far. That's a bridge too far. I can't reach for that, but I can reach for a moment of okayness. Right. And so we have those moments and we just look for them. Right. And if I'm working with someone, I'll notice a moment and say, oh, that felt like a tiny moment of okayness, a moment of goodness. I just wanted to mention that. So I just want to mark the moment. Sometimes it's too much to do anything with it because it's really scary to the nervous system to think I've let down my guard. Right. I can't, I'm not protecting myself anymore. One of my early clients taught me that. She said, I'm afraid that if I find my way to regulation, to okayness, which is what we called it, I won't be safe in the world. Made perfect sense, right? Of course that makes sense to her nervous system, because why would she feel safe in the world when she's had to protect herself? And so what I tell people is, if you find the moments of okayness, if you find the glimmers, it doesn't mean your survival instincts, your survival strategies are going away. It does not mean that in any way. That your system is always there to keep you safe, and you can notice the moments when maybe you didn't need it quite as much, or maybe there was a moment you thought, oh, I could just enjoy, I'm just feeling the feeling of sun on my face, or the sound of a bird singing, or my cat who just climbed into my lap, some tiny thing that's an okay thing. And it's safe to feel those, to notice those moments. And in fact, what it does is it helps your system have more capacity to then deal with the dysregulation, to deal with the trauma, to work with what's the suffering that's happening in the world. And if we think for a moment about recovery, right, we can be clean and sober from sympathetic or dorsal, right? But you can't build a recovery lifestyle. You can't build a life of well-being from sympathetic or dorsal. That has to happen from ventral. And so there are lots of reasons to find our way to ventral so that we can build a different way of navigating the world, right? And then if we continue to think about recovery for a moment, relapse doesn't happen in ventral. Relapse happens in sympathetic or dorsal, because that's where all of my distress is held, right? And we know everybody's going to dysregulate sometime. So we build in the capacity to notice, when am I dysregulating? And then what do I reach for? Right? Because my system's going to say, oh, here's what you reach for, because you've always reached for this, your drug of choice, whatever that is, whether it's, a substance or a behavior, doesn't matter. Your system says we can count on this. So we want to build in, what else can I reach for? Right. And one of the things that I love to help people be able to reach for is another human. Right. That's hard to do because people are dangerous. Right. That's what our nervous system learned. People are dangerous. Why would I want to reach for a person? Right. I'm going to be let down. I'm going to be hurt, whatever. And so we start other places. Can you reach for nature? Can you reach for spirit? Can you reach for, your cat or your dog? Right? We begin to build this menu of things you can reach for, and then your system begins to learn there are other things, right? Yeah.
It's brilliant, Deb, just how you articulated all that. It got my brain going on a kind of a, I don't know if it's a rabbit hole or not, but so we're coming in towards Christmas, and we're talking about a person that's in their ventral system, and then they can get triggered, and all of a sudden then they're in their sympathetic or dorsal. And so to me, there's two kind of hidden triggers for people. So coming into Christmas, you've got all of a sudden subconscious memories at this time of year that you're not doing well all of a sudden and you don't know why. So that's one piece. And secondly, we talk all the time with polyvagal stuff around danger, but what I think a lot of people don't realize is growing stress in your life feels dangerous to your nervous system.
Yep.
So stress needs to be talked about as well as a trigger. So can you just kind of touch on those two?
Yeah, and it is so much going on at this time of year, right? With families, with expectations. And also for, depending on what hemisphere you're living in, it's getting darker and colder, right? So we have all sorts of things going on. And a couple things come to mind. One, when you were talking, one of the things that I think is really helpful to do is to just simply create 2 lists. One is, what are the cues of danger that I'm noticing? Right. We can take I got to go do this thing or just, it's Wednesday and I'm not doing well. Right. What are the cues of danger? Get very concrete about them. Cues of danger. My to-do list is too long. I'm in financial distress. I can't feed my family. There's an expectation. Whatever it is, write them down, because those we need to bring into explicit awareness. Otherwise, we can't work with them, right? And then the other side of your papers, what are the cues of safety? What are the cues of connection that I'm probably missing? Because my system's so focused on the danger, it's not letting me see the safety. So what are the cues of safety that either are there or I could invite in? Right. And once we get them out here on paper rather than just here, spinning around out here on paper, we can begin to see them differently and do something. And the cues of danger, you can say, does this take me to sympathetic, anxiety anchor, or does this take me to dorsal disconnect? And you can begin to get a sense of where you're going and why. Again, that's the context piece that's so helpful. And the cues of safety, every one of those cues of safety is going to bring you a little bit of ventral energy, active and alive. So that's an easy, not easy, but it's not simple. It's easy, not simple, but a way to begin to put it out there and begin to see what is happening. Because when it's just happening in here, I can feel pretty crazy, right? I can feel like I have no idea why I'm doing this or saying this or feeling this, because it's all just here. But if I put it out here, I can begin to work with it.
I love it. One of the things I say to clients is that when you switch to your sympathetic or dorsal, it has a pull on you to certain actions because it's going into survival. And so often what it's pulling you to do action-wise is not going to help you at all long term. It might make you feel a little better in the moment.
Right.
To get back to ventral, to connect and all of that is probably the last thing you feel like doing at that moment.
Yeah.
And so that's why I love that you got it on paper where you can go, okay, what do I need to do to get back to safety? And realize, I don't even feel like going and phoning somebody or going out for coffee, but that's what I need to do. I don't feel like going for a walk, but I need to, is so important.
And you want to put, I like people to make a menu of resources, right? Make a big menu because, when you were saying, I don't want to go for a walk, I was thinking, nope, I don't want to go for a walk. But sometimes I can just turn on music, right? Which will take me, sort of begin to help me feel a little bit more here in the world. So you want to create a menu that has resources that have all different levels of energy needed. Right? Like going for a walk, when I'm in dorsal, going for a walk is, can't do, but I can push the button and turn the music on, right? When I'm in sympathetic, getting outside and walking is exactly what my system wants to do. It just wants to move in some way, right? So it's perfect. But yeah, so I like creating lots of choice.
Yeah, and I think how I explain it to clients is when you're in a certain state, you might know I should do this, but that's not an attainable step.
Nope.
So you got to find an attainable step.
Exactly.
That's going to move you towards the right end result. But
exactly.
It to jump there in one step is impossible.
Exactly.
And so that menu idea is, again, fantastic. So
And whenever you say should, because we say should to ourselves a lot, whenever we say should, we know we're not in regulation. Should is not a ventral word. It's a sympathetically driven word. You should or shouldn't, right? No, that's your survival state is pushing you for good reason, but it's not going to help us get where we need to go. Yeah.
So can you just speak to kind of stress's role in all of this as far as subconsciously working?
Yeah, we're always working, I call it the stretch to stress continuum, right? When we're stretching, right, I'm moving through my day and I'm working hard and I'm stretching and I'm pushing myself to do things. I'm being productive and my nervous system is supporting me in doing that. But when I move across the line to stress, when it begins to feel too much, I'm not getting anywhere. My list isn't getting shorter. I can't do what I need to do. That's stress, and the nervous system starts to go into sympathetic survival, and it will then either stay there or take you to dorsal, right? As soon as we move to stress, which on a nervous system level is simply meaning you've lost your anchor in ventral and you're now in sympathetic and could be on your way to dorsal, that is unhealthy. That's a dysregulation, right? And we have to find a way. And if we can notice that when it first starts happening, right? When you first start feeling, oh, I'm losing my grip here, or wow, I was swimming, now I'm treading water and I'm going to sink soon. If you do it then, it's easier to come back and say, let me just make a cup of tea, or let me stop for 5 minutes. Let me, whatever my nervous system needs in order to take a breath and then go back to it. Then it's good. But a lot of times we override that and we just keep pushing. Nervous system will not respond to, it doesn't respond to no pain, no gain. It says, if you just keep going, I will take you to survival because that's what I can do.
Yeah. So devil's advocate a little bit here. So let's pick a client who grew up in a very chaotic household where it was unpredictable. There was lots of anger, lots of abuse type of stuff. So their stress system was in the red constantly. So an 8, 9, or 10 on a scale of 10 was their normal.
Yep.
So now when they're going through a day and their stress system's at a 4 or 5, they don't think they're stressed.
Right. Right. And, for their system, that may be okay. Right. I mean, because every system, and I will say, this is a sign of resilience, right? You dysregulate and come back, dysregulate and come back. And your resilience level is not a static level. It rises and falls. There are some days when I have a high level of resilience and I could be at a what you might describe as an 8 stress and be doing perfectly fine. My ventral is still there running the show. And there are other days when I could be at a 3 and I could dysregulate and go to head to dorsal. So again, it's that practice of knowing, where am I? What's my nervous system doing in this moment? Because on a 1 to 10 scale, your 4 and my 4 might be very different in this moment and very different tomorrow. So right. Again, what I love about this way of working is it's not a standardized protocol.
But my question then for a client would be, and this is what you're getting at, is what are the early warning signs that the stress is starting to cause me to switch?
Right.
So for myself, when I begin to realize that I have more trouble being present to my wife or my kids, something's going on in the background that is causing me to go to survival mode.
Yep.
When I get a little bit more impatient with people, a little less tolerant, a little more antsy, I just can't sit still. So what other would be warning signs that something is building that I might not even be aware of?
So when we map this, we look at, how does your body show you? You're beginning to move into a survival. What are some of the behaviors that happen? What are some of the emotional feelings? And what are some of your thoughts? And so we map those 4 categories, and then you begin to see, oh, this is what begins to take me into sympathetic fight flight, and then this is what takes me into dorsal collapse shutdown, right? I know, and I know because my children have told me that I begin to move into that sympathetic anger, anxiety place. They call me cranky. Right? When I begin to get cranky, and I know what that feels like to me, and I know what it sounds like. So that for me, that is a sure sign that, oh, wait a minute, something, don't keep going down that road, because you'll go from cranky to all those other things, and you don't want to go there. Right? And for me, the dorsal sign, I think if we find one sign that really is a clue for us, my dorsal sign is that sense of going through the motions, but not really here doing it. Right. So for me, when I notice, those are 2 things I can notice. And when I notice that, I can stop and go, wait a minute, I need to do some further assessment here and figure out what's going on. Right. And I think it's really helpful for people to say, these are a couple of clear signs for me.
I would say, for like how I would describe for myself, that dorsal sign is I start to be robotic.
Yeah.
I'm going through the motions, but there's no emotion attached to it.
Yeah.
And I'm basically, everything else is shut down, but going through the motions is happening.
Yeah.
Okay, Andy, my apologies. Back to you.
I see how this goes. I'm getting the rhythm here.
No, I like some of the specificity that we're going into here, and I was wondering, so something that's come up a lot recently in facilitating as clients, where we have that freeze response in conflict. And I was wondering if you could explain what's happening in that moment, and what are some of the things that you'd invite them to do in the moments afterwards, and maybe what does long-term healing begin to look like?
It's interesting because freeze, when people talk about freeze, my next question is, let's get to know the freeze response you're talking about, because in the good old days when we talked about fight, flight, freeze was a total dorsal collapse where I'm frozen because I have no energy in my system. I can't move. Right? That there are no thoughts. There's no energy. There's no nothing. Right? And so that's a full dorsal freeze. Right? Which looks like a full collapse. Right? The other freeze that many people experience is this blend of sympathetic and dorsal, because I can feel that I'm flooded with energy, right? And my muscles are rigid. I have that rigidity, and my eyes maybe open a bit, and I can't think, not because I have no thoughts, but I either too many thoughts or jumbled thoughts, or I can't figure it out. So there's all of this energy, but I'm immobile because dorsal has immobilized me. So that's a blended state. So in this blended state, when you unfreeze from that, you usually will go to full anger, anxiety, full sympathetic, or full dorsal collapse. So I think of it as a stepping stone. You've left ventral. You aren't in sympathetic yet. You're in this blend, and you're either going to go full sympathetic or full dorsal afterwards. And I think for people who feel the freeze, whichever freeze they feel, when they get in a conflict with someone and they can no longer function for whatever, freeze is happening, I think noticing it and naming it is the first thing, and normalize. We talked, I love putting things together. So we notice, name, normalize, right? And say, your nervous system is simply trying to protect you, and this is how it's learned to do it. Right? So once we come out of that, we can then reflect back on it, and we can begin to identify what was the nervous system neurocepting that it took you to this place, because we saw the point in time, and we want to see, is there a pattern here? Is there a familiar cue? Is there a pattern of cues that takes you to that place? So if I can understand it for myself, and you can help me understand it, then I can share that with the person I've had a conflict with, because their brain is making up a story. Right? Because they just had this interaction with me where I froze in whatever way. And that's very unsatisfying for their nervous system, gotta say. So they need something. And so I can say, here's what I figured out just happened. And when I can share that, then we can begin to have a different story emerge. So that's often what I do. It's about the understanding. And I usually need somebody to help me reflect and understand, right? So I need somebody else's regulated system to join me, to help me feel some of that. And then when I can begin to understand it, then I can share it with the people around me and say, here's what happened, right?
I, I like the distinction, but also that normal notice, name, and normalize. So many people, what I find is there's a lot of shame
Yeah,
afterwards. Like that sympathetic is, why didn't I do something?
right.
Why didn't I respond? I should have done this.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I want to ask you, like, is there something, I think the notice, name, and normalize really moves there, but is there something specific that you would say to somebody who's experiencing this shame afterwards?
You know, I often find myself saying to people, of course, that's the response. It makes perfect sense that that's the response because, and then you look at it through the nervous system, right? Because through the eyes of the nervous system, it makes perfect sense that that's how you responded, right? And that's the only response we have in the moment. We don't have a cognitive capacity to respond. We have an embodied nervous system survival response. So, I think understanding the of course, and that everybody's nervous system does the same things. I like to tell people it's the common denominator in our human experience. Every nervous system has these same responses built in, right? You didn't choose it. It's built in and it's protecting you. That's its goal, is to make sure you live to the next moment so that you can, be in the world still. The other thing, I think, when I understand that's helpful, but I think I need to create a community of people. I need to create a system of people who all speak the same language. That's really, I think, the beautiful part of this is that, I speak this language. My children and grandchildren would probably tell you they are forced to speak this language, but we can talk about, oh, that was a dysregulated moment, right? Because it's a different experience, right? I just noticed that I'm feeling really dorsal today. I don't kind of want to do anything, right? Which is a different experience than, the cognitive experience of, oh, grandma just doesn't want to be around me today, right? So when you create a micro community of people who are sharing a nervous system lens to life, I think it gets so much easier.
I like that, the contrast, so much with when it comes to shame leads to silence, but to create this language in a community where you have that connection.
Yeah, and then to create a enough knowing about each other's nervous system so that, I have certain people in my life who when I go silent, they'll reach out and say, just checking to see, are you really busy or have you gone into your dorsal dwelling, right? Because they know me, right? And I love that, right? So if we have people who know our nervous system patterns, then they'll check in with us, not with a demand that anything happen, but just it's nice to know that people are there, right?
Mm-hmm. I love the dorsal dwelling. And then earlier, the one that I really connected with is the sympathetic storyland, which is such a great way to just explain like how we start to look for the things in our world that our body is feeling.
Which is your home away from home, Andy? Are you more sympathetic or dorsal?
I have been stuck in a chronic hypervigilance
Mm,
as well as a dorsal shutdown.
mm, yeah.
But then there's a lot of the fawn, the please appease in there as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm gonna hope you find lots of glimmers off and on here
Mm.
too. Yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting to see our patterns though, and then begin to be curious about when did they come into being, and the fact that they're still serving us. I mean, I have been a dorsal dweller for my survival pattern for as long as I can remember, and I think I I think I always will be. It can change. I've had people say I used to be this and now I'm this. So I love that. But I think I'm always, it's where my system knows to go. So yeah. Yeah.
One of the questions we get asked most frequently is, where do you find safe people? And so I want to connect. I hear what you're saying. I love it. But how do I create safety for myself? And so then I've had to kind of nuance that, because what I've found for a lot of people is they want to somehow jump to connecting with other people, but they've never connected with themselves.
Yeah.
Because their neuroception is picking up that they're not a safe person and they've abandoned themselves.
Yeah.
So there's two elements there. It's learning to connect with myself as part of this process of finding safety and creating a safe place with myself, and then finding safe people.
Yeah.
Can you speak to those two?
Yeah, and I think in the world of helping professionals, we take on the responsibility to be the safe, regulated other for the people we're working with, right? And I in my work teaching, I often tell people, you may be the first regulated human this person has ever had the chance to be with. Right? It's a huge responsibility that we take on, but I do think that's where it can begin with our being regulated and welcoming in a nervous system way. I often get people who say, my client says I'm the only one they can talk to, or this is the only place. And I say, so meet them there and say, I am so glad that you feel safe and connected here. Let's identify what are the cues that bring that alive for you, because when we can identify those, we can begin to look for them other places. But until we can identify what that nervous system needs to feel safe and connected, we have no idea. Because again, what works for you may not work for me. Right? And so again, we want to get very clear about what is it that your nervous system is longing for and feels would be, welcoming of connection. So, and I do think we have to start somewhere with my clients. Besides me, most of my clients had a pet, and pets are a wonderful way to, a mammalian pet, not your pet iguana or your pet snake, but your cat, your dog, your horse, your cow, your whatever. But, pets are good. And then, some people will follow people, will watch them, listen, whatever, and can feel that connection, even though they haven't actually been in connection. So we begin to get creative about how do you begin to feel, you can connect with another human and dip a toe in it. Try it on for size, see what happens. Because for many people in the world, there aren't safe people around them, right? And so, we have to make sure that we find, some safety somewhere. That's why sometimes groups are lovely, right? If we can find a group where we really do feel welcomed and safe. But again, it's I think we build from one person, right? And then we go from there. Sometimes people have ancestors that they feel connected with. That there's a sense of ancestral safety and connection. That's okay. Some people have, their practices include spirit guides or spirit animals, which can bring a flavor of that. But I really do think, and I may be hard to say this, but I really do think you need a living, breathing nervous system to come into connection with and feel that sense of safety in that way of being.
As you're speaking about connection, I want to kind of jump across to the other side of something that helps to create connection safe, but setting boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how do you hold boundaries without collapsing, escalating? What does a boundary look like coming from ventral?
So yeah, ventral boundary is such a different boundary, isn't it? Than that sympathetic boundary is, I've just gotten really angry and everybody else has run away. That's how I set my boundary. They all go, right? Or the dorsal boundary is, I've disappeared and you don't know it, right? So I've set a boundary because I'm no longer here. Doesn't matter, right? But a ventral boundary is a way that I can say, here is what I need from a place of regulation, right? I sometimes say, I think you can say most anything if you're in ventral, right? And it's probably about true. You can tell someone something if it comes from your ventral regulated place, even the difficult things. And we can't have the difficult conversations if we're dysregulated. So, setting a boundary from ventral means talking about me, right? And we've been doing this forever in the therapy world. Don't talk about you, talk about me. But in a nervous system way, it's absolutely true. Here's what my nervous system needs. I don't even say, here's what I need. I always talk nervous system. Here's what my nervous system needs in order to do whatever it is, right? It needs space. It needs time alone. It needs you it needs to not have your sympathetic energy dysregulating. We can talk about it in these ways, and then we can have the conversation, right? Because if I say, here's what my nervous system needs, right? What does your nervous system need? Right? And sometimes it's so far apart. It's like, wow, I'm not sure how we're going to ever find common ground here. But sometimes we can say, oh, well, I could do this, you could do this, right? And we can find our way. We have to be willing to say our nervous systems are too far apart right now to make this work, right? I know somewhere in some book I wrote, yet's my favorite word. Just put yet on the end of a sentence. So our nervous systems can't come into connection yet. Right? Sometimes we need to recognize that there's too many barriers in the way for each nervous system being able to feel regulated enough to do this thing. And that's okay. Again, it's not about wanting or not wanting, it's about nervous system. And I think that helps.
I love that you're talking about setting boundaries from different states, because I think for most people growing up within complex trauma world is they've set either in the sympathetic state, aggressive, or isolate the dorsal state. I'm just going to pull away from everybody. That's how I set a boundary. What I want clients to realize is in both states, if you set boundaries in those two states, you always feel guilty afterwards.
Yeah.
And then you cave on it, and then you don't enforce it. And you go back on it. So you train the other person that your boundaries don't matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's only when you're in your ventral state and you give a reason, this is what I need, and then you can stick to it. Then you can enforce it. And so just for you to explain it that way was great.
And you can recognize it's not that I don't want to do this thing or whatever it is I'm being asked. It's that my nervous system says I can't. It's saying no. That something's out of balance here. Too many cues of danger. Really, when it comes down to it, the simplest way to think about it is the cues of danger are outweighing the cues of safety. That's all it is. So, I'm going to respect that. I'm going to honor the wisdom of my nervous system. I think if we can do that, right, rather than override it. But I'm just honor my nervous system is saying, I can't do this right now.
There's a lot here about a budding, developing self-awareness. And some of the questions, some of the things that you've said, some of the questions that you led Tim through earlier, I can see those as being extremely valuable for beginning that awareness. Is there anything else that you feel would be valuable for somebody to know if they're just coming into this for the first time to begin to build that self-awareness, to have that awareness of their own nervous system, their awareness of connecting with others?
I mean, it's got to start here. It has to start with us befriending our own nervous system first. I can't do anything with you and yours until I understand mine. My guiding questions, where am I? What state am I in right now? And that's always where I have to start. Do I have enough ventral? Am I anchored in ventral? Have I gone fully to dysregulation? Where am I, right? And then, the second question is, what does my nervous system need in this moment to feel a little more welcome, a little safer, a little, whatever the qualifier you want to put in, because it's not always safe that is a word that works. It is what the nervous system's looking for, but it might just be, what does my nervous system need to feel a little less distressed in this moment? Right. So and again, I'm always asking about nervous system. So I think when we begin to understand what our three states look like, feel like, sound like, then we can answer that question, where am I? So it's sort of taking that step back to saying, I have a map. It's called the personal profile map. Do you give resources to your listeners? Do you have a way of putting resources out there?
We could add something in the show notes for sure.
Because I can send you the PDF of that map. With the directions, because that's really where you need to start. You need to know, how do these 3 states come alive for me? Because if I don't know where I am, I don't know what to do. So that's where I would start. I'll send you that, because, my hope is everybody, begins to understand where they are in their nervous system. Like, where am I? And if I'm in ventral, can I celebrate that for a moment? This is great. Can I hold on to it or deepen it for just a moment? And if I'm in a dysregulated sympathetic or dorsal, then at least I know where I am, and I can begin to look for what might help.
Since I in the past, I've been kind of dense in my own healing. And so what I'm going to ask is, you've given some examples of cues of safety and some examples of glimmers. And I was wondering, so sometimes it's like one thing resonates, but something else maybe just it glances off the side. And so could you give some more examples of what people have found, even some that may be surprising, for both cues of safety,
Yep.
glimmers?
Yeah. So, we do. Cues of safety are interesting because in the moment, a cue of safety can be something you've never thought of before, right? Like, it's interesting that as I'm looking at the two of you, I get the typical cues of safety. You're, the way you look, the way you smile, the way you move, all of those things. But I get a cue of safety. Your plaid shirt, Andy, for some reason, and I could take a moment and I could think about, but without even having to think about it, it's just this resonance. My nervous system is safe. I don't know why. I don't need to know why, but it's resonating, right? You and when you stop to notice them, you think, there are more cues than I thought. Cue of danger, I will say, for in your background, Andy, is that there's nothing there. And so for my nervous system, it's like, who would think about these things? But when you stop and think about them, you begin to recognize for yourself, they're these, typical cues of safety and danger for me. Glimmers, you gotta figure out, how do you notice a glimmer? Right? That's where we start. How does your nervous system send you a message that something just appeared that was drawing you towards a sense of connection or safety or okayness or joy or magic or whatever it is, right? So you begin reflect on your day and think, was there a moment that when I look back on it now, maybe that was a glimmer? You begin to get to know how your glimmers come to life. I do this other thing called anchors, and I think anchors are easy to do. They're the category of who, what, where, and then we have touchstones. So you can begin to think about who are the people in your life who, when you're around them, you feel okay, right? And maybe you don't have those people, but we begin to look for them, right? What are some of the small things you do that remind you that ventral's around, that energy of connection is around, right? And they're just simple things, not practices, not big practices, but simple things like, looking out the window and looking out in nature, or patting your dog, or the simple things you do. And where are the places in your world where you feel, safe and okay, where you feel welcome, right? Often nature brings that to us. Sometimes it's a place of worship. It's a place in your house, right? So those are the anchors. And then touchstones are what are the things that we, the scents that we bring in, the things we wear, the lucky socks that have some, flavor for us that we just feel good, right? Like when you were getting dressed today to do this podcast, your nervous system helped you do that. Right? When I was getting dressed, I was thinking, what do I want to wear that makes me just feel, like I'm good to go, right? And this happens without our thinking about it. But if you think about it, you'll think about, you've got a favorite sweater or a favorite shirt or a favorite something that when you put it on, you think, now I'm okay, right? So these are some of the ways that we can work with our nervous system to begin to find those small moments. And that's where we want to start. We just want to start with small moments, right? Something that's within reach. A tiny moment that I can recognize and I can name it, I can mark it, right? And then, the other thing that we do with our glimmers or our anchors or whatever is if we share it with somebody else, we get that sense of connection, right? So, when I was telling you that your plaid shirt brought me something, that sharing in it brought it alive for me again. And then I could feel the sense of it was okay to say that. And so we had that moment that deepens that experience, so that we want to find little ways to begin to reach for more moments of ventral, because the beautiful thing about the nervous system is that the small moments accumulate, right? So we don't need this great, big, awe-inspiring day to change our nervous system. It could change the nervous system when we do have those moments that happen, but the nervous system changes. It's reshaped by small things happening over and over and over. And for me, that's really reassuring, because in the life I'm living right now, the small moments are within reach. One great big day or 6 hours I don't think I can do that, but I can have the small moments. And for my clients, and especially my clients who were, really suffering with unresolved trauma, knowing that they didn't need long moments of regulation to reshape their system. They just need tiny moments, was so reassuring and brings the hope, right? That's the hope that comes from the nervous system.
This to me is such practical teaching for people that is everyday stuff. So I picture myself, just let's say have a hard day where there's kind of one frustration after another that is piled up, and I get home and I go, okay, I'm still my ventral, but everything else is really close to wanting to take over. What do I need to do to really get anchored well in the ventral? And so if my wife comes up and it's not just how was your day, but, oh, you had a rough day, a hug.
Yeah.
Or I sit down and put on some music, or I crochet. I love to crochet. That gets my hands going in a rhythm that's very therapeutic. I do something with the dogs, or a grandkid comes up for a big hug, and it's all of those little somatic experiences that just help the nervous system inch its way to a better state. Can you, there's so much now about kind of somatic therapies, from dance to art to pets to, and you've mentioned so many of them, other very just practical little steps that help the nervous system that people can take.
Yeah, and I think it's really individual. And I like to tell people, you will get people telling you to do these 5 things, right? And check with your nervous system, because your nervous system is going to say yes, no, or maybe. If it says no, just throw it out and try something else. You do not need to do that thing, right? If it says yes, go for it. If it says maybe you want to play with it, right? But the categories, some kind of breathing, a lot of people use breathing. I don't. I sigh a lot, because sighing there's science around sighing. So sighing works for me. Some kind of movement, right? Whether it's just a simple whatever kind of movement, whatever works for you, right? Some kind of connection, right? With an animal, with nature. We have 4 pathways of connection: to self, to others, to the world, and spirit, right? So something in one of those categories. You talked about crocheting, which is the movement plus art, some kind of art, some kind of music. Begin to look for categories and think, if I filled something in these categories, for me, and maybe for you too, reading, right? Diving into something that catches my interest is a way for me. So we think of what are the ways that you are drawn to, and then we can resource those. And what are the ways that don't work for you? And maybe you want to play around with it, or maybe you just think, just not for me, right? Yeah, but it's really in being curious and creating your own list of things. And then it is fun to compare lists with other people, because I have friends. I am not a mover per se. I love like organized things, but if it's like spontaneous, totally freaks my nervous system out. I will disappear immediately. And I have friends who are, they love improv and dance and all this stuff. And I look at them and go, I love that you love that. Do not ever ask me to come near that. Terrifies me. So it's fun to think of things that are on your list and would so not be on my list, right?
I agree with all of that. And then compare my list with my wife's list, and it's night and day in some areas. And we just both had to learn what works for me doesn't work for you, and that's fine.
Yeah.
It's different nervous system.
And it's nice to know your lists, because then when you come home and sit down to crochet, your wife knows, oh, he's just taking a little time to, find his way back.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, Deb, for people who want to explore more of your work and continue learning with you, where would you like them to go to find you?
Oh, come to the website, rhythmofregulation.com. We're always trying to put new things up and have free resources. And you can sign up for the newsletter, which I will say comes out randomly. So it's not good for a nervous system that needs predictability, but my nervous system just can't do it more than randomly. So, but we do love to. We're trying to create a community, right? Where the glimmers are something that we're really working with, and so we're trying to create a global glimmer community, a global glimmer collage. We invite people to send in their glimmers, and we begin to pull them together, because again, it's a hard world we're living in right now, and I will say that I can get overwhelmed very easily and very quickly by the what I think needs to be changed, and I have no idea how to change it. And so for me, coming back here to my nervous system is helpful, because this system I know I can work with. All those systems, totally, I don't know, but this system I can work with. And there is immense power in moving through the world from a regulated place. Right? I can impact so many nervous systems just by being regulated, and so I take that on as a goal, as a responsibility to be responsible for what's the autonomic information I'm putting out into the world, knowing that we can change the world this way.
That was really beautiful. Deb, I want to thank you for your depth, clarity, the steadiness, the safety that you brought into this conversation. Your work really gives so many people an accessible way to connect with and learn how to welcome their own nervous system. And so we're grateful for the tenderness and the precision that you bring, for how you help people feel less alone inside their own bodies.
Thank you. Thank you.
To everyone listening, we hope that today helped you feel just a little more curious, a little more compassionate toward the patterns that your body's carried. And I think that some of what we discovered today is that healing, it helps to be noticing what's happening, honoring the wisdom in it, and just gently supporting the natural pathways back to connection. And so thank you everyone for being with us. Take good care of yourselves. Take good care of each other, and we'll see you next time on Time with Tim. Thank you for joining us on the Time with Tim podcast. If you'd like to share your own experiences or have questions, feel free to email us at podcasts@timfletcher.ca. Want to learn more about complex trauma? Subscribe to Tim Fletcher's YouTube channel for past lectures and his Friday night Tim Talks. You can also connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and TikTok. Looking for more support? We offer programs and courses to help with healing complex trauma and recovering from addictions. Visit timfletcher.ca to learn more or send us an inquiry. We're here to support you. Until we meet again, take care, and thank you for letting us be a part of your healing journey.